Hello, everyone. My name is Jalen Jones, digital producer here at WRAL. Welcome to On the Record. If you haven't done so, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more content you guys can't get anywhere else. This U.S. Senate race here in North Carolina has national implications, from the president having input on it to the state governor having input on it on both sides of the aisle. Our amazing NC Capitol team took some time to break it down with all the context, all the history. Here's Will and Paul breaking it down.
All right, Paul, we are here talking about our U.S. Senate race. This is obviously the big ticket item for our elections this year. We have hundreds of elections across the state, but this is the one that's really going to be drawing the national attention. And there's around a dozen people running for U.S. Senate.
Right. Top of the ballot, as they say. It's the highest priority for both parties on the ballot. And that's because control of the U.S. Senate could swing depending on how things go across the country from, Republican control to potentially Democrats if they're able to win.
Yeah.
What is it, 3 seats?
I think that's probably pretty unlikely, but as time marches on and you see Donald Trump's approval numbers continue going down and down and down, some Democrats are starting to think, hey, maybe we actually have a shot at flipping the Senate here.
I would say if you were to ask them, they would say that North Carolina is their best chance of flipping a seat. The Democrats would say that. That's because it's open. Incumbent senator, who you probably still see on TV all the time, Tom Tillis, in his second term decided not to run for re-election because of disagreements with President Trump over his One Big Beautiful Bill and how it affects health care, specifically Medicaid and things like that. So now we have an open seat. And on the Republican side, 5, maybe more? Definitely more than 5 candidates.
Well, you will see a lot of candidates on your ballot on the Republican side, but one of them is Margot DuPree, and votes for her aren't going to be counted. Right. Well, they will be counted, which could affect if it goes to a runoff or not, but she is not going to be allowed to win the primary because of this whole situation. I've covered it. Our colleague Caroline Yaffa has covered it.
That's so crazy. Yeah. And we should, a disclaimer, she was not going to win it anyway. Right. But just this mess that she's in has been such a weird side story for these last couple months. Do you mind just rewinding and explaining who is Margot DuPree? Why did she decide to run? And then why can't she win legally now?
Yeah, so she is from Florida. She says that she is a North Carolina resident. The Board of Elections was not swayed by her arguments. She registered to vote.
Someone registered a complaint against her after
Correct.
She filed? Okay.
Correct, yeah. Voter, just a regular voter down in Fayetteville. It wasn't, a politician or anything like that, but he just, he noticed that, hey, she's registered to vote at a UPS store in Charlotte. Can't do that. You have to list your address. And so she came to the Board of Elections. She said, well, I don't really have a permanent address yet in North Carolina, but I do intend for this to be my home. I've just kind of been, living in this RV as I campaign around the state. And they said, okay, well, where's your RV parked? And she said, well, it's at my house in Florida. And they said, oh, well, where's your husband living in? She said, oh, he's still at my house in Florida. So they decided that she was not really a true North Carolina resident.
Now, what's interesting about this to me, and we can move on, quickly, is that when these races come up, like you said, tons of races on the ballot for U.S. Senate, Congress, legislative races, we see at least one challenge to someone's residence every election.
Yes.
And it's so hard to prove that someone doesn't live where they said they lived. In this case, this is one of the very few cases that went before the board, and they said, you know what, challenger, random voter from Fayetteville, you're right, she doesn't live here.
Right.
It seems like, the fact that they are blocking her doesn't actually happen.
Yeah, I have covered, and I think you have covered, some of these challenges in the past where, it is so obvious that the person is lying about where they live.
Right.
And, they want to, run in a district where they have to live somewhere else, and so they have just the flimsiest excuse ever for why they think that they live somewhere.
They might have a house in the district, but they turn it into a rental house, and they're claiming it as their own, but they really live at the beach.
Literally like a shack in the woods with no power or water.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the Board of Elections almost always lets them get away with it. But this was one time when they said no.
That's so funny. And, the fact that we're talking about it this much shows how interesting or uninteresting this primary has been. And that's because Donald Trump President Donald Trump came out so early last summer and endorsed former North Carolina Republican Party chair Michael Whatley in this race.
That's
Whatley had ascended even since his time in North Carolina to be the chairman of the Republican National Committee. And when he did that, there were some people on the ground here that said, oh, well, there's some members of the base that have some problems with how he ran the North Carolina Democratic Party. Republican Party. They have some problems. Yeah, there'd be a much bigger problem if it was the Democratic Party. But they want to hold him accountable for those things when he ran the Republican Party here in the state. And it was going to be interesting to see if some rogue, maverick could come along and persuade the base. But now it appears as if there's just too many candidates to be able to do that. You think that's fair to say?
Yes. I think you're absolutely correct. One of the big problems that the base here in North Carolina had with Tillis was that he wasn't sufficiently aligned with Trump and that he was just too establishment. And then so Trump picks Whatley. And now, got to say, Whatley is very aligned with Trump.
Oh, yeah.
Anything that Trump says, Whatley says, yes, I support this as well.
I will say this. Back when Whatley was running for chair of the Republican Party, back I think it was 2019, we started calling around and saying, who is this guy? Why him? And our Republican sources, strategists, staffers, operatives were like, oh, Whatley was one of the first guys to really endorse Trump, even back in 2015 and 2016 when he ran for president. He's a Trump guy. And so at least amongst the white collar, Republican pundit and Republican strategist class, they've known him for a while.
Correct. But he is as establishment as they come. I mean, he was a D.C. lobbyist and then ran the state party and then ran the national party. I mean, that is just the establishment. And there were a lot of people in the base who said, we don't want that. We want an outsider. We want somebody who hasn't just, been living and breathing politics their entire life. And so, the question was, is that lane going to be open for someone who, even if they didn't have Donald Trump's endorsement, to make the pitch to the MAGA base, the MAGA voters, that, hey, I am the true MAGA candidate. And by the way, there was actually a really interesting poll that the Carolina Journal just published, which, for people who are not familiar, it's a Republican magazine think tank here in Raleigh. They polled GOP primary voters here in North Carolina, and they said, what is your approval of the Republican Party and what is your approval of the MAGA movement? And among the GOP base, the MAGA movement actually scores higher than the Republican Party.
Wow.
So this is exactly why we're talking about right now, is there that lane open for someone to say, I am the true MAGA candidate?
Right. And at first, it looked like it was going to, the torchbearer for the MAGA movement was going to be Don Brown. He's from Waxhaw. He's an attorney. He's represented people who were prosecuted and convicted of crimes from January 6th. He's also represented people who didn't want to comply with vaccine mandates. And he has various other accomplishments that the MAGA base would argue are accomplishments that would put him to the quote unquote right of Michael Whatley. That would make him more accomplished in that sense of saying, well, I'm a fighter. I'm a regular guy. And this sort of thing.
And a lot of the people who said, we like Trump, but we think that he made a mistake endorsing Whatley, Don Brown was their guy for this race.
We've seen Steve Bannon, an advisor to President Trump, went on his show or podcast, whatever it is, and say, Whatley's not MAGA enough. I like, Don Brown. I can't remember if he endorsed him, but he talked about him. Mm-hmm. And so it appeared as if Brown could put up a fight against Whatley. Then on, I believe it was the last day of the filing period last year, the last day that you could file your paperwork to run for U.S. Senate, the former Republican nominee for education superintendent here in North Carolina filed to run. Her name is Michelle Morrow. She got a lot of media attention in 2024 for some things she had said about Barack Obama and about the public school system. And was she at January 6th too?
She was.
Yeah. And so she has a lot of name recognition. And so I imagine there are people, we say the Republican base. Oftentimes what I think about when I say that is the people who go to the county meetings, the Mecklenburg County Republican Party, the Pasquotank County
Exactly.
that have these luncheons and pancake breakfasts and things like that, where the hardcore people show up and talk about how they can help Republicans win elections in their county. They know Michelle Morrow and they know Don Brown, and I imagine some of them are torn now, and that's good for Michael Whatley.
Yes, this really does split that kind of, we want the outsider, the more, aggressive candidate to represent us. Those types of voters are now split. They have two different options. And so that obviously helps Whatley. The question is just going to be, as I mentioned earlier, do we have a runoff in this race? I think everyone expects that, Whatley will probably, pretty safely be in first place. But the question is just, can he break 30%, which is what you have to get more than 30% of the vote to avoid having a runoff election against the next highest vote getter.
Right. And so as long as anyone breaks 30 and they're in front, they win. Right. And I just, it's hard to see that happening because there are those three, and then a handful
There's a handful of
people.
others who haven't really been seriously campaigning. Those are the three main names.
Right.
Whatley, Brown, Morrow. And, there were, 2+ million people here in North Carolina who voted for Michelle Morrow to be leading our school system just 2 years ago. She's not, an unknown factor. So, she could absolutely tap into that same base of support who, came pretty close to putting her in charge of schools.
Right. She, I think, came 3%, within 3 percentage points of Democrat Mo Green in that 2024 race. One thing I think has been interesting to watch is how these candidates spend their time. Michael Whatley only talks about Roy Cooper, the presumptive
Correct.
Democratic
He doesn't
nominee.
even acknowledge the existence of another Republican in the race.
Even when we ask him, when he filed to run, I asked him about criticisms that he wasn't MAGA enough from other candidates. Talked right past it. Said, Trump. I have Trump support. Didn't mention Don Brown or Michelle Morrow's name at all. Don Brown has gone after Michael Whatley. He talks about. I haven't seen Michelle Morrow talking much about Michael Whatley. She tends to go after Roy Cooper too, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. Speaking of Roy Cooper, should we talk about the Democratic Party?
Yes. All that to say, this appears to be headed toward a Michael Whatley versus Roy Cooper matchup.
Yes, because while we do have some of this drama on the Republican side, there's really no drama on the Democratic side. There are, again, multiple candidates running, and some of them are running, fairly serious campaigns. There's a lawyer from Wilmington named Marcus Williams. I've talked to him several times, and he's run for office before. He ran for governor in 2024. And he has a background. He's run some community development groups. He's been a public defender. And there's Justin Dews, who is he used to be in the Marine Corps from out in Concord, and he is running as a very progressive candidate. Definitely to Cooper's left, calling for a $30 minimum wage, universal health care, things like that. So he's trying to tap into that more progressive vein of the party, but I just don't think that there's enough oxygen for anyone to beat just the Cooper machine.
Let me ask you this. Give me your opinion. And shoot straight. Why? No, Roy Cooper has never lost a race in his life, which is an amazing stat because he's been in politics so long. I think he's 16-0 or something like that.
Roy Cooper has been in elected office for longer than I've been alive.
Yeah. Why would these people decide to run? Is it just to get their names out there, or what is it? I don't think they would get enough publicity to even push Cooper to the left or the right, whichever way they want to push him. Why do you think they jump in?
Well, if you you truly believe in yourself and your message that you have, then people are going to be talking about this race. Journalists like us are going to be writing about these issues, and we do reach out to these candidates whenever we're doing stories. I've done it on when I'm writing about where they stand on banning members of Congress from trading stocks. When we're talking about tariffs. Now the Supreme Court has shot down President Trump's tariffs and said Congress needs to vote on this. I reached out to every single candidate and said, okay, how would you vote on this? And so. And some of these candidates that we've been talking about have responded. We haven't always gotten responses from Cooper and Whatley to some of those questions.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't want to put out anything that could potentially hurt them in a general election.
Right.
But, some of these smaller candidates, when the news media does stories like that, that's a chance for them to get their message out there. And, yeah, even if they're probably not going to win, this U.S. Senate race, maybe, they're going to run for, Congress or the state legislature or their local county commissioner at some point in the future. And this is, kind of a trial balloon, get their name out there.
Yeah, I can see that. So what have Whatley and Cooper been saying? They seem focused very much on each other, despite the fact that it's primary season. Man, all of their messaging is about the other.
Right.
And we see headlines about them every week.
Yes. It's a lot of attacks. Yes, the candidates are saying, some of what they support a little bit, but it's much more focused on going negative. And I think especially as this race heats up, we're going to see a lot more of that as just, it's not always here's why I am the best person for this job. It is here's why my opponent would be terrible. And you can't risk having that person in D.C.
I think we've seen Cooper and the Democrats have labeled Whatley as a D.C. insider, a lobbyist. And a lot of people don't know Michael Whatley if they weren't already Republicans. That might be effective. Meanwhile, Whatley is saying that Cooper is soft on crime. They're trying to tie him to that homicide in Charlotte where that young woman was killed on the train. I fact-checked all the arguments there, and cannot find a connection between anything Cooper did as governor or his policies and whether or not it led to Irina Zarutska's death. There appears to be no connection at all.
Correct. And I think it's fair to say anytime you do one of these fact checks, you reach out to, the Whatley campaign or whoever's saying it, and it always seems to be that they move the goalposts. You say, hey, you say this thing and it is just false. And they say, well, what you should look at instead is this. So it's that kind of thing. But while there are some questions about that, I think a lot of people do point to, Roy Cooper, when he was governor, created this, commission on, racial equity that did support some things like, ending cashless bail, things like that, say, okay, even if it, didn't directly lead to any of the events for Irina Zarutska's murder, these are still issues that we oppose, and we don't want to send somebody to the Senate who supports these issues.
Yeah, it's a way of getting attention. And so they're running the Whatley campaign is that Democrats and Cooper are soft on crime. So they say, look at this vicious crime, this vicious crime in Charlotte. He did that. It's like, oh, well, maybe not. But look at this task force. You wouldn't agree with these policies, would you? It's a way to get their attention to that. So Whatley we've seen running on Democrats being soft on crime, Cooper being soft on crime is his allegation. Cooper, meanwhile, is running on affordability. In fact, he just created – what did he create? I saw it's like some new slogan. What does it mean, and what is he doing?
The Make Stuff Cost Less tour. He is going to be kicking that off in just a couple of days.
Make stuff cost less. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine the acronym. So MSC – not quite the same as MAGA, but
no,
doesn't really work.
Doesn't really roll off the tongue quite the same.
Yeah.
But no, he is. I think he's absolutely right to focus on the economy as the top issue for these midterms. And we've seen reporting out of D.C. That even some of Trump's people have been telling him, "Hey, quit talking about immigration. People have really already made up their minds on immigration. We're not going to, convince anyone who's on the fence if we, keep talking about immigration issues. We need to just pivot to the economy because." When you look at it, Trump is telling people that the economy is great and, wages have been improving, but inflation is also going up even as wages are.
It has slowed.
Yeah.
This time last year, the year-over-year inflation rate was 2.9. This January, it was 2.4. So it went down by half a percentage point. We fact-checked just this. It's burned into my mind because I had to do a PolitiFact segment on it earlier this week after Trump's State of the Union. But that's still not what the Federal Reserve wants to see. They want to see it at 2% or lower.
Right. So it's still, what is that math? 25% higher than what the Feds want to see? I think so. People can correct me if I'm wrong on that math.
Well, if it's 2.4 and they want it below 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And GDP growth has really slowed since Trump took office. It was 2.2% in his first year in office. That was lower than every single year under Joe Biden. And so, he's telling people, that, hey, the economy's great, but, the growth is slowing down. And, industry after industry after industry is having all of these massive layoffs because of AI or other reasons. And you've done a lot of reporting about how, the AI companies are now pouring, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into this year's races to try to influence, who gets through some of these primaries. It's the economy is going to be a really big issue. And so Cooper has identified that and is just saying, I'm going to just really be focused almost entirely on this one topic.
Right. What have we seen from the polls on this race? Hypothetical matchups between Cooper and Whatley.
Yeah, if you look ahead to the general election, there is some polling. There's really not been a ton of polling on the primaries, I think just because everyone sees it as such a foregone conclusion. But there was a poll recently I saw that, put Cooper at about 50%. Whatley was low 40s, and then, there was still about 10% or so undecided.
Mm-hmm. People may think that Cooper is a favorite to win, and maybe he is. But North Carolina tends to vote Republican in federal races, statewide federal races.
That's right.
We haven't elected a Democrat since 2008.
That's right. Kay Hagan kind of rode Barack Obama's coattails into office in 2008, but she was the last Democrat that North Carolina has sent to the Senate.
Right.
And so even as, Cooper has been successful winning the governor's office, even in those same years that he was elected governor, Democrats still failed to win those Senate races against Tillis, Richard Burr.
One thing that the operatives tell me is that regardless of what the polls say, in statewide races in North Carolina, in the final months, or when both parties pull out their final arguments, the last punch, so to speak, and they say that oftentimes, the margin of victory tends to just shrink.
Yes.
Like if it looks like Cooper's up 10, he may win by 3 or 4. They said the same about Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley back in 2022 when Budd won his seat. But they say, the polls, they just really don't reflect the political reality of North Carolina, and that's that people tend to come home, as they say. And they come home to vote for their longstanding political party, and, things are just so close in our state all the time.
Yes. Even though, there are Republican primary voters who, think that Michael Whatley isn't MAGA enough, they're still going to vote for him over the Democrat, in November. And same, there might be some Democrats who think that Cooper isn't progressive enough, but they're not going to vote for Michael Whatley for Senate. They're going to vote for Cooper. Mm-hmm. So, the polling can be a little tricky this far out. But in general, Cooper, you would expect Cooper to have an advantage in polling. He's the former governor. He's been in office for so long. And Whatley has really always been a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. Mm-hmm. So he definitely has some work cut out for him to improve his name recognition and to tell voters who he is and to define himself and not let Cooper define him to the voters.
Right. Well, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that is important for folks to know?
No, just check WRAL.com for everything that you need to know on how to vote on Tuesday, and all the different rules for when polling places are going to be open, how to find your sample ballot, get your right ID, everything like that. We've got it all.
That's right. Great way to send it off. And for other shows like this, for like podcasts, go to WRAL.com or go to our YouTube page, like and subscribe. We talk about a lot of the other races from Congress on down to the state legislative races. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Will. Again, amazing NC Capital team. You guys can keep up with them on WRAL.com/NC Capital. I'll have that link right there below. Thank you guys so much. If you haven't, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more content you guys can't get anywhere else. Thank you guys so much for watching On The Record.